Dear scholars, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome in the class. As you know, in last week we studied chapter 9 of John Locke's second discourse, second treatise. Today we discuss chapter 10 of the forms of a commonwealth. And this chapter starts with the question how government forms are created, how various forms of government are created. When people first join a society, the majority holds all the power of the community. This is a natural result of them uniting. When people start the society for the first time, the majority holds the power of the community. The majority can use this entire power to make laws for the community over time. They can also use this power to carry out those laws. So the power lies with the majority. This is done by having officials whom they themselves choose. So the people choose their officials themselves. If they do this, the government is a perfect democracy. If power lies with all the people and the people choose their officials, it is perfect democracy. Alternatively, the majority can choose to place the power of making laws into the hands of just a few chosen men. Chosen men. They elect their representatives. This power can be given to those few men and their descendants or replacements. No, they are not representatives. They are chosen as the rulers. If they do this, the government is an oligarchy. Or the majority can put the power of making laws into the hands of one single man. If few chosen men rule, it is oligarchy. If one chosen man rules, if they do this, the government is a monarchy. If the power is given to the man and his heirs, it is a hereditary monarchy. If the power is only given to him for his lifetime, and the right to choose his replacement returns to the majority when he dies, it is an elective monarchy. So, an elective monarchy is also possible. The majority can also mix and combine these forms of government as they see fit. Sometimes the majority may give the lawmaking power to one or more people for only their lifetimes or for a set time limit. Sometimes the majority may give the lawmaking power to one person or to more people for only their lifetimes or for a set time limit. So there can be limit. There can be a tenure. After that limited time is up, after the tenure, the supreme power then comes back to the community. When the supreme power comes back, the community is free to use it again. They can choose to give it to any group they please. They can then set up a new form of government. The form of any government depends entirely on where the supreme power is placed. This supreme power is the lawmaking power, legislative power. Legislative power is the supreme power. Lawmaking power is the supreme power, which makes the laws. It is impossible to think that a lower power could give orders to a higher power. A lower power cannot order the higher power. Only the supreme power can make laws. Therefore, the structure of the country or the commonwealth is determined by where the lawmaking power is located. Point 133. What Commonwealth means? When I use the word Commonwealth, John Locke says, when I use the word Commonwealth, I do not mean only a democracy. I also do not mean any single form of government. Instead, I want it to be understood that I mean any independent community. So, by Commonwealth, John Locke means any independent community, any sovereign community. The ancient Latin word for this was civitas. The ancient Latin word for an independent community or for a commonwealth was civitas. The word that best matches civitas in British English is commonwealth. Commonwealth properly describes such a society of people in a way that the word community does not. For example, there can be smaller communities within a larger government. The word city is an even worse word to use for this idea. The word city is an even worse word to use for this idea. To avoid any confusion, I ask for permission to use the word Commonwealth in this way. So, John Locke uses the term Commonwealth for sovereign country, for independent community. I believe this is the proper meaning of the word civitas. King James himself used the word in this exact way. If anyone dislikes this, I am happy to change it for a better word. Chapter 11 of the extent of the legislative power. What is the extent of the legislative power? Someone is calling. Miss Naseem Akhtar is calling. Okay, chapter 11 of the extent of the legislative power. The legislative power is supreme. The main reason people join society is to enjoy their property in peace and safety. The main reason people join society is to enjoy their property in peace and in safety. The most important tool for achieving this is the laws established in that society. So we can be safe, our property can be safe, our life can be safe only if there are laws in our society. If our society does not have any laws and we do not abide by those laws, our lives and our properties are not safe. Therefore, the first and most basic man made law in every country is the establishment of the law making power. So, a law making power is established for the first, as the first thing. It is called the legislative. Even the legislative power itself is governed by a basic natural law. A basic natural law. That natural law is the preservation of the society itself. It also includes the preservation of every single person in the society as far as the public good allows. This legislative power is not just the supreme power of the country, it is also considered sacred. The legislative power is supreme, and at the same time, it is considered sacred and unchangeable once the community places it in certain hands. No order from anyone else, no matter how it is written or who backs it up, can be a valid law. So, only the legislative authority can make the legitimate laws. A law must have its authority from the legislative power that the public chose and appointed. Any law must have its authority from the legislative power that the public chose and that the public appointed. The legislative power has to be appointed by the public. The legislative power has to be chosen by the public. Only then it is legitimate. Without this, the law is missing the one thing it absolutely needs, the consent of the society. So, the legitimate law must have the consent of the society. It is an absolute need for good laws. Nobody can have the power to make laws over the society except by the people's consent. So, without the consent of the people, nobody can have the legitimate right to make laws and by the authority they received from them. So, the legislative authority receives this authority from the people. So, people are sovereign. Because of this, all the obedience we are bound to give ends in this supreme power. All the obedience we are bound to give ends in this supreme power, legislative power. Our obedience is always directed by the laws that the supreme power creates. So we obey the laws. In effect, actually, when we talk about obedience of the legislative authority, actually we obey the laws. No promise made to any foreign power or any power inside the country that is less than supreme can excuse a citizen from obeying the legislative. So, no citizen is excused, no citizen is above the law, no citizen is exempt from the law. Each and every citizen has to abide by the law. This is true as long as the legislative is acting according to the trust the people placed in it. If the legislative exempts some individuals or exempts any individual from the law, if any person is put above the law, it simply means the legislative authority has violated the consent of the people, it has violated the trust of the people. A citizen also cannot be forced to obey anything that is against the laws. A citizen also cannot be forced to obey anything that is against the laws or goes further than the laws allow. If anything goes further than the laws allow, the citizen cannot be forced to obey it. It is simply ridiculous to think that a person would be tied to ultimately obey any power in the society that is not the supreme one. So the citizens are not obliged to obey the authorities which are not supreme. Point 135. First limit. The law is not absolute. Even though the legislative power is supreme, it has limits. It is not absolute. Whether the power is held by one person or many, and whether it always exists or only meets sometimes, it cannot be absolutely arbitrary. It cannot be lawmaking authority cannot be arbitrary. It cannot have unlimited power over the lives and fortunes of the people. The legislative power is only the combined power that every citizen gave up when they joined society. The combined power, legislative power is the combined power that every citizen gave up. It cannot have more power than those people had in the state of nature before they gave it up. So only the legislative is supreme only to this extent that the power given to it is given by the people and only to the extent people had in the state of nature. Nobody can give another other person more power than he has over himself. Very important. This point is very important. Pay attention. Nobody can give another person more power than he has over himself. So the people in the state of nature, before the establishment of the society and the government, they had power over themselves. And when they formed society, they combined their power in the legislative. And the legislative cannot exercise any authority beyond that. Crucially, nobody has absolute arbitrary power over his own life to destroy it or to take away the life or property of another person. A person cannot put himself under the unlimited power of another person. A person does not become a slave to another willingly. In the state of nature, a person had no unlimited power over the life, freedom, or property of another. He only had the power that the law of nature gave him to protect himself and the rest of mankind. The person in the state of nature only had the power that the law of nature gave him to protect himself and to protect the rest of mankind. This is the total power he gives up to the country and through it to the legislative power. Therefore, the legislative can only have this much power, no more. The legislative can have no more power than this. Its power of the legislative, even at its furthest limits, is restricted to the public good of the society. The power of the legislative is restricted to the public good of the society. The power has no other purpose than preservation. The legislative power has no other purpose than preservation of the citizens and preservation of the society. Because of this, the legislative can never have the right to destroy. The legislative can never have the right to enslave or deliberately make its citizens poor. The legislative authority cannot do this. So these are the limits on the authority of the legislative. The authority of the legislative is not absolute. The rules of the law of nature do not stop when people enter society. So the rules of the law of nature continue into the society and the state. Instead, they are made clearer in many cases. In the state of nature, the laws of nature were not as clear as they are made clearer in the state of society. Human laws add known punishments to the law of nature to make sure it is followed. So, in the state of nature, there were no punishments for violation of the law of nature. When society is formed, the state is formed, the government is formed, laws add known punishments to the law of nature to make sure it is followed. Thus, the law of nature stands as an eternal rule for everyone, including the lawmakers themselves. The law of nature stands as an eternal rule for everyone, including the lawmakers themselves. The rules the lawmakers create for citizens must follow the law of nature. The law of nature is the will of God, and its most basic rule is the preservation of mankind. Vettel is a French philosopher. He has written a very good book. Its title is The Law of Nations. In that book, he defines the law of nature as don't do to others what you don't want to be done to yourself. He explains that how can mankind be preserved. The law of nature helps preserve the mankind. So the law of nature requires don't do to others what you don't want to be done to yourself. The no man-made law can be good or valid if it goes against the preservation of mankind. If any law is against the preservation of mankind, it is not good. It is not according to the law of nature. The nature wants to preserve humanity. Point 136. Second limit on the legislative. The legislative must rule by known laws. The laws must be known to people. There can be no hidden law. Secondly, the legislative or supreme authority cannot rule by sudden orders, cannot rule by arbitrary orders. It must dispense justice and decide the rights of the citizen by published fixed laws. So all the laws must be published and fixed. The law must be carried out by known authorized judges, and the judges should implement the law. The law of nature is unwritten and can only be found in the minds of men. People who are guided by emotion or self interest may misquote it, they may misapply it. People who are guided by emotion or self interest, they may misquote the law of nature, they may misapply the law of nature. It is not easy to prove them wrong if there is no established judge. So there has to be established judges who interpret the law of nature. Because of this, the law of nature alone is not good enough to secure the rights and property of those who live under it. The law of nature alone is not good enough to secure the rights and property of those who live under it. This is especially true when everyone is both the judge and the enforcer in their own case. If someone is so powerful that he or she is the judge and the enforcer in their own case, then it will be true. A person who is right usually one only has his own strength. A person who is right usually only has his own strength to defend himself against harm or punish wrongdoers in the state of nature. To avoid these problems that cause disorder in the state of nature, men join societies so that they collectively can protect themselves. They join so they can have the united strength of the whole society to defend their property. And let me remind you here, John Locke defines property. Property, according to John Locke, includes life and possessions. They also join so they can have fixed rules that everyone knows. So people join society, people leave the state of nature so they can have fixed rules that everyone knows. For this reason, men give up all their natural power to the society they join. Men give up all their natural power to the society they join. The community gives the lawmaking power to the hands they think are best suited. They give it with the trust that they will be governed by declared laws. Otherwise, their peace, quiet, and property would still be just as uncertain as it was in the state of nature. So the people don't come out of nature to stay unprotected. They come out of the state of nature and they form society to have protection, to have safety and security. Point 137. Why arbitrary power is worse than the state of nature? Absolute unlimited power or governing without fixed laws is not compatible with the goals of society and government. The unlimited power is not compatible with the goals of society. It is not compatible with the goals of government. People would not give up the freedom of the state of nature to be ruled unless it was to protect their lives, freedoms, and fortunes. So, lives, freedoms, and fortunes is collectively property in John Locke's philosophy. They want to secure their peace and quiet by using established rules of right and property. It cannot be assumed that they intended to give anyone absolute unlimited power over their persons and estates. So the people did not want dictators, they did not want the autocrats. They wanted to have a state and a government which protects their life, liberty, and possessions. They would not intend to arm a ruler with the power to enforce his unlimited will on them without any limits. This would put them in a worse situation than the state of nature. In the state of nature, they had the freedom to defend themselves against the harm of others. They were on equal terms of force to protect themselves, whether the invader was one man or a group of men. So anyone had the right to protect themselves against the invaders in the state of nature. If you assume they gave up their freedom to the absolute will of a lawmaker, they have disarmed themselves. So why would someone disarm themselves? And they have armed the lawmaker to take advantage of them whenever he wants. So no wise man would do this to disarm themselves and to arm someone against themselves. A person exposed to the unlimited power of one man who commands 100,000 soldiers is in a much worse situation. He is worse off than if he were exposed to the random power of 100,000 individual men. So, in the state of nature, the person was exposed to the random power of 100,000 individual men. And in dictatorship, in under autocratic rule, the person is exposed to the collective power of 100,000 people. So, in this case, he would be worse off. No one can be sure that the will of the one man with command is better than others, even though his force is 100,000 times stronger. No one can be sure that the will of the one man with command is better than others, even though his force is 100,000 times stronger. Therefore, no matter what form the country takes, the ruling power must govern by declared and accepted laws. No matter what form the country takes, the ruling power must govern by declared laws, by accepted laws, the laws that have the consent of the people. It must not govern by sudden orders, it must not govern by changing decisions. If it did, people would be worse off than in the state of nature. This is because they would have armed one or few men with the strength of the many. This power would force them to obey the huge and unlimited decrees of the ruler's sudden thoughts and unknown wills. There would be no rules in place to guide and justify the ruler's actions. All the power the government has is only for the good of the society. The governments are formed and established for the good of the people. It should not be unlimited. The power of the government should not be unlimited or done based on a whim. The power of the government should not be done based on a whim. It must be used through established and published laws. This way, the people know their duty and are safe within the law's limits. The rulers are also kept within their proper boundaries. This prevents them from being tempted to use their power for purposes that they would hide or would not willingly admit to. So it prevents the rulers from their heinous intentions, their bad intentions. Point 138. Third limit on the legislative. It cannot take property without consent. Thirdly, the supreme power cannot take any part of a man's property without his own consent. The main purpose of government is the preservation of property. This is the exact reason men join society in the first place. This necessarily means that the people must have property. If they were expected to lose their property by joining society, it would be extremely absurd. So it would be foolish that the people would join society to lose their property. No one would willingly agree to this. Therefore, men in society have a right to the goods that are legally theirs by the community's law. Men in society have a right to the goods that are legally theirs by the community's laws. Nobody has the right to take any part of those goods without their consent. Without this consent, a person has no property at all. I truly have no property in something that another person can legally take from me whenever he pleases, against my will. It is wrong to think that the supreme or lawmaking power of any country can do whatever it wants. It cannot use its power to take the estates of the citizens without restriction or take any part of them or at random. This is less of a worry in governments where the lawmaking body is made up of assemblies that change regularly. So, in fact, where the assemblies are changed regularly and the governments are run by those assemblies, it is democracy. When the assemblies break up, the members become ordinary citizens under the common law of their country, just like everyone else. So the members of the assembly they become ordinary citizens after their tenure. But there is always danger in governments where the lawmaking power is a single permanent assembly. If there is no tenure and the members of the assembly are chosen for their life till the death, then they will be dangerous. That assembly will be dangerous for the protection of the society, protection of the rights of the citizens. The danger is even greater when the power is held by one man, as in absolute monarchies. They are more dangerous. These rulers will likely think they have an interest that is separate from the rest of the community. They will then be likely to increase their own wealth and power by taking whatever they want from the people. Point 139. The people must consent to taxes. It is not enough to say that the lawmaking body cannot take a man's property without his consent. Where the government is always meeting or the ruler is one permanent man, this rule is most important for practical reasons. Even in governments where the lawmaking body changes often, the people still have to give their consent for the government to raise money. So the elected people have the right to impose tax. Even in the best regulated governments, the government needs money to support itself. They need money to support the officials who work for the public. The government also needs to fund the military for defense. Therefore, the ruler is justified in demanding that every man pay a share of his property to support the country. It is called tax. But this must only be done with the consent of the majority. So the majority has to consent to the tax. This consent can be given directly by the people or through representatives they have chosen. If anyone claims the power to set up taxes on the people's property by his own authority without the consent of the people, he is directly breaking the fundamental law of property. If anyone claims the power to set up taxes on the people's property by his own authority without the consent of the people, he is directly breaking the fundamental law of property. He is overturning the goal of government. He is failing the purpose of government. What protection is left for a man's property if another person has the power to take it whenever he pleases? Point 140. Military command and the law. The government and military leaders are sometimes given the power to command the people to put themselves in harm's way. The government and military leaders are sometimes given the power to command the people to put themselves in harm's way when the society needs defense against foreign invaders. This is a great power, but it is necessary for the preservation of the country. When this order is lawful, the person who refuses to obey is rightly punished with death. This can happen even if they are a general or the most brave soldier. But the power of life and death does not give the leader the power to take one penny of that soldier's estate. So, again, dear scholars, very important. It is a very important point. A ruler, a general, a military leader can ask the citizens to sacrifice their life for the defense of the country, for the defense of the community. But the military leader does not have the right to take one penny of that soldier's state of any citizen. The general can order the soldier to march into the mouth of a cannon, but the general cannot take the smallest part of the soldier's money without an act of parliament or his own officer's order. Why? Because his whole life is not as valuable to him as his property is to his family. The life of the soldier is spent for the safety of the community. His property is not so needed for that same purpose. The absolute power of the military leader over the soldier's person does not include the power to use the soldier's possessions for his own pleasure. The greatest general who has absolute power to punish a soldier with death cannot take that soldier's money for himself. Point 141. Fourth limit on the power of the legislative. The power cannot be transferred. The lawmaking power cannot transfer the power of making laws to any other hands. This power is only a delegated power from the people. So the legislative authority enjoys the legislative authority or the power given by the people. So it cannot transfer that power to anybody, any other body. Those who have it cannot pass it on to others. Only the people can decide the form of the country. They do this by setting up the lawmaking body and choosing who will hold that power. So people do this. People set up the lawmaking body and people choose who will hold the lawmaking power. When the people have said, "We agree to be ruled by laws," made by these specific people and in these specific forms. Nobody else can say, other men shall make laws for them. The people cannot be bound by any laws unless those laws are made by the people they chose and authorized to make laws for them. Point 142. The four major limits on legislative power, which we have discussed. These 4 points are the boundaries that the trust from the society and the law of God and nature have set for the lawmaking power in every country. These are the four limits on the legislative authority in every country. First, the government must rule by established laws that are officially known and published. These laws cannot be changed for individual cases. There must be one single rule for everyone, the rich and the poor, the court favorite and the farmer at his plow. Everyone have the same rights under the law. Secondly, the ultimate purpose of these laws must be only for the good of the people. Thirdly, the government must not raise taxes on the people's property without the consent of the people, given by themselves on their or their representatives. This point mainly concerns governments where the lawmaking body is always active or where the people have not kept any lawmaking power for themselves to exercise over time. Fourthly, the lawmaking body must not and cannot transfer the power of lawmaking to anyone else. They must place the power only where the people originally placed it. So, it was the chapter 11 of John Locke's second treatise. So, I am closing YouTube and joining you back on Google Meet.